One revolution, many stories. How different countries teach the birth of the United States. When we think of the American Revolution, many of us imagine a unified moment of defiance, a group of colonists rising up against tyranny, demanding liberty and democracy, and forging a bold new republic. But the way this revolution is taught and remembered depends deeply on where you are in the world. In this video, we'll explore how the story of the United States founding, the Declaration of Independence, the war against Britain, and the birth of a nation is told very differently in different countries. It's one revolution, but many stories. But before we start, I'm on a road to get 1,000 subs as a small channel. If you want to help me, then like, subscribe, and enjoy watching this video. Thank you. Let's begin with the historical basics. In the late 18th century, 13 British colonies in North America grew increasingly frustrated with British rule. They had no representation in Parliament but were subject to taxes and laws passed in London. Tensions escalated over a series of acts: the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts, and eventually exploded into open rebellion. On July 4, 1776, colonial leaders adopted the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. The document argued that people had the right to overthrow a government that failed to protect their natural rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What followed was a brutal war between the British Empire and the American colonists, who were aided by France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic. After 7 years of conflict, the war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and the United States became an independent nation. But the real story isn't just about what happened, it's about how that story is retold, reinterpreted, and reframed in different national narratives. In the United States, the Revolution is more than just history. It's a mythic origin story. It's the moment when the American people were born. Textbooks and public celebrations like the 4th of July frame the Revolution as a heroic and almost sacred event. The Founding Fathers are portrayed as courageous visionaries. Phrases like "no taxation without representation" and "give me liberty or give me death" are taught to schoolchildren as foundational truths. An American textbook might say, "The American Revolution was the defining moment in the birth of a free and democratic nation. The founders laid the foundation for a republic based on the principles of liberty, equality, and justice." National pride is woven into the narrative. The revolution is seen as a necessary break from tyranny, a model for other democracies, and the beginning of a city upon a hill, a phrase used by leaders like Ronald Reagan to frame the U.S. as a moral guide for the world. But critics often note what's left out of this version. Enslaved people made up nearly 20% of the colonial population, and the revolution didn't free them. Native Americans were largely excluded and often fought against the revolutionaries. Women had no formal political rights and were also excluded from the new republic's political life. So while the U.S. version centers on liberty, it's often selective in whose liberty is highlighted. In Britain, the American Revolution occupies a very different place. Rather than being central to national identity, it's usually presented as one of several colonial conflicts. Important, yes, but not defining. British history curricula focus far more on the Industrial Revolution, the British Empire, and the World Wars than on the American War of Independence. When the American Revolution is mentioned, it's often as a complex political dispute rather than a moral crusade. A typical British school textbook might summarize it like this: discontent in the American colonies grew due to taxation and lack of political representation. Despite military efforts, Britain was unable to suppress the rebellion, and the colonies formed an independent republic. It's a more dispassionate tone. The colonists aren't heroes, but neither are they villains. The focus is often on how Britain responded, what it learned, and how the loss reshaped imperial policy. Importantly, the war is sometimes framed as a lesson in overreach, a cautionary tale about governing distant colonies without accountability. It's viewed not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. In France, the American Revolution is treated with a sense of ideological and historical kinship. French students learn about how their country played a major role in the American victory, especially the military leadership of Marquis de Lafayette and the crucial Battle of Yorktown, where French naval power helped tip the scales. But it's not just about military involvement. French educators often present the American Revolution as a precursor to the French Revolution of 1789. The ideas of liberty, popular sovereignty, and resistance to monarchy resonated deeply with French intellectuals and commoners alike. A French textbook might explain, the American struggle inspired revolutionaries across Europe. It showed that monarchy could be resisted and replaced by the will of the people. These ideals would soon take root in France and fuel a revolution of our own. There's a clear sense of shared Enlightenment heritage, but also historical irony. France's financial support for the American colonists helped bankrupt the French crown, contributing to the collapse of its own monarchy just years later. In Dutch history classes, the American Revolution is rarely a central topic, but when it appears, it's often discussed from a diplomatic and economic perspective. The Netherlands was one of the first countries to formally recognize American independence in 1782, establishing early diplomatic and trade relations. Dutch merchants saw an opportunity in dealing with the new republic, and the Dutch Republic hoped to balance British power in global trade. A Dutch narrative might say, the American Revolution disrupted the global balance of power and trade. The Dutch Republic recognized the United States early, opening new channels for commerce and diplomatic influence. There's little national emotion attached, no heroes, no epic drama. It's pragmatic and tied to the country's long-standing focus on commerce and international diplomacy. However, the Dutch also suffered. Their recognition of the U.S. helped trigger the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, a conflict they largely lost. So the revolution also had economic and military costs, something rarely noted in American or French versions of the story. Now let's turn to the Global South, countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean that experienced European colonization. Here, the American Revolution is often framed as an early example of anti-colonial resistance, a symbolic precursor to independence movements in the 20th century. In countries like India, Indonesia, Ghana, or Jamaica, the U.S. is sometimes held up as a case study in how a colony can challenge a mighty empire and win. A textbook in Postcolonial nations might say, the American colonies were among the first to reject imperial domination. Their success inspired future generations to fight for self-determination and national sovereignty. However, this admiration is often tempered by criticism. Post-colonial historians point out that the U.S., after winning independence, excluded many from its promise of liberty, including enslaved Africans, indigenous peoples, and women. Some see the revolution as a limited rebellion by a privileged elite rather than a full social transformation. Additionally, the U.S. later became an imperial power itself, annexing lands, waging wars abroad, and asserting influence across the globe. So in the post-colonial world, the American Revolution is not just a symbol of hope, but also a cautionary tale about revolutions that fall short of justice for all. All these different interpretations tell us something important. History is not neutral. It reflects the values, priorities, and identities of the people telling it. In the US, the revolution is a proud founding myth. In Britain, it's a lesson in lost control. In France, it's a philosophical spark. In the Netherlands, it's a diplomatic opportunity. In post-colonial nations, it's a complex symbol of both resistance and contradiction. And that raises a bigger question. When we teach history, are we teaching facts, or are we reinforcing identity? History is always shaped by perspective. Every classroom, every textbook, every national museum curates a version of the past that supports a certain vision of the present. The American Revolution may have happened nearly 250 years ago, but it still sparks debate, not just about what happened, but what it means. And as we've seen, that meaning can shift radically from one country to the next. So next time you hear someone talk about liberty, rebellion, or nation building. Ask yourself, whose version are you hearing? Whose voice is missing? Thanks for watching. If you found this exploration valuable, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history. And let us know in the comments. How is the American Revolution taught where you live? We'll see you next time.